The North American Union is a grand vision to dissolve national borders between Mexico, the United States, and Canada, and merge the three nations into a single political, economic, cultural region. This vision has evolved quietly over the decades, but emerged into public view with the signing of the Security and Prosperity Partnership by President Bush, Mexico's President Vicente Fox, and Canada's Prime Minister Paul Martin. The Security and Prosperity Partnership is one of many political agreements which, like building blocks, are constructing the North American Union. Here's how Lou Dobbs describes what is to become a borderless nation.
The critical issue in this country's fight against radical Islamist terrorism. But our borders remain porous, so porous that 3 million illegal aliens entered this country last year, nearly all of them from Mexico. Now, incredibly, a panel sponsored by the Council on Foreign Relations wants the United States to focus not on the defense of our own borders, but rather create what effectively would be a common border that includes Mexico and Canada. Christine Romans has the report.
On Capitol Hill, testimony calling for Americans to start thinking like citizens of North America and treat the U.S., Mexico, and Canada like one big country.
The best way to secure the United States today is not at our two borders with Mexico and Canada, but at the borders of North America as a whole.
That's the view in a report called Building a North American Community. It envisions a common border around the U.S., Mexico, and Canada in just 5 years. A border pass for residents of the three countries, and a freer flow of goods and people. Task Force member Robert Pastor.
What we hope to accomplish by 2010 is a common external tariff, which will mean that goods can move easily across the border. We want a common security perimeter around all of North America so as to ease the travel of people within North America.
Buried in 49 pages of recommendations from the task force, the brief mention we must maintain respect for each other's sovereignty. But security experts say folding Mexico and Canada into the U.S. is a grave breach of that sovereignty.
That's what would happen if anybody serious were to embrace this strategy for homogenizing the United States and its sovereignty with the very different systems existing today in Canada and Mexico.
Especially considering Mexico's problems with drug trafficking, human smuggling, and poverty. Critics say the country is just too far behind the U.S. and Canada to be included in a so-called common community. But the task force wants military and law enforcement cooperation between all three countries.
Indeed, an exchange of personnel that bring Canadians and Mexicans into the Department of Homeland Security.
And it wants temporary migrant worker programs expanded with full mobility of labor between the three countries in the next 5 years.
The idea here is to make North America more like the European Union. Yet just this week, voters in two major countries in the European Union voted against updating the European Constitution. So clearly, this is not the best week to be trying to sell that idea.
Americans must think that our political and academic elites have gone utterly mad at a time when 3.5 years, approaching 4 years after September 11th, we still don't have border security, and this group of elites is talking about not defending our borders, finally, but rather creating new. It's astonishing.
The theory here is that we are stronger together, three countries in one, rather than alone.
Well, it's a mind-boggling concept. Christine Romans, thank you.
Robert Pastor has been called the father of the North American Union. His book, Toward a North American Community, and his research papers for the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations describe his vision of the North American Union. Pastor says that the three nations of the North American Union should adopt a common external tariff, adopt a North American approach to regulation, establish a common security perimeter by 2010, establish a North American investment fund, establish a permanent tribunal for North American dispute resolution, hold an annual North American summit meeting, establish minister-led working groups, create a North American Advisory Council, and create a North American Interparliamentary Group. Pastor's vision has been under construction for decades. In 1975, he was executive director of the Lenowitz Commission on U.S.-Latin American Relations. He then was appointed director of the Office of Latin American Affairs in the Carter administration. He maneuvered the Panama Canal Treaty through the U.S. Senate in 1978. He was nominated by Bill Clinton to be ambassador to Panama, but not confirmed. He has been advisor to every Democratic presidential candidate since 1976, and in 2002 he became the Vice President of International Affairs and Professor of International Relations at American University. Among the many political agreements that are constructing the North American Union are the La Paz Agreement, in which the U.S. and Mexico agree to cooperate on environmental issues. The agreement was expanded to include Agenda 21's Sustainable Development Principles through the Border Region 21 program. Then comes the North American Free Trade Agreement, as well as the first summit on the Free Trade Area of the Americas. The North American Supercorridor Coalition was organized. The second FTAA summit was held in Santiago. Robert Pastor published Toward a North American Community. The Kansas City Smart Port was organized, and the third FTAA summit was held in Quebec. The Trans-Texas Corridor was formed, and the Central America Free Trade Agreement was approved by just one vote in the House of Representatives. These are just a few of the agreements and events that are building the North American Union. NAFTA is one of the most important building blocks of the North American Union. In fact, Robert Pastor says NAFTA was merely the first draft of an economic constitution for North America. Let's take a closer look at the North American Free Trade Agreement. NAFTA became effective January 1, 1994. It is governed by a commission consisting of cabinet-level appointees from each country. It is implemented by a secretariat consisting of appointees of the commission. Take note, NAFTA is governed by appointed officials. The people who make NAFTA's trade policy are not directly accountable to the electorate. For dispute settlements, NAFTA offers two primary options: the procedures of the World Bank's International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, or the procedures of the United Nations Commission for International Trade Law. NAFTA's Article 511 requires that each nation conform its laws to the uniform regulations adopted by appointed policymakers, and that any modification or additions to the uniform regulations be adopted by the member nations within 180 days. CAFTA, too, is governed by a commission consisting of cabinet-level appointees, who in turn appoint committees and working groups to implement the agreement. Both NAFTA and CAFTA are the responsibility of the United States Trade Representative, but the Department of Commerce also has responsibilities for implementation. The USTR is an agency within the executive offices of the President. Susan Schwab is the current U.S. Trade Representative and represents the United States on the NAFTA Commission. Carla Hills was the U.S. Trade Representative who negotiated NAFTA. She is the same Carla Hills who served on the Council on Foreign Relations Task Force, along with Vice Chair Robert Pastor, that produced the CFR's special report, Building a North American Community. Pastor provided congressional testimony and wrote many articles in favor of NAFTA during the negotiations. This helps explain why Pastor's vision for a North American community is so closely reflected in the North American Free Trade Agreements. NAFTA brought more building blocks. The Ports to Plains Trade Corridor Coalition was organized to promote a trade route from Mexico through Central Texas and Denver. The North American Supercorridor Coalition was formed to promote a corridor through East Texas and Kansas City, and the Texas Department of Transportation created the Trans-Texas Corridor. The Trans-Texas Corridor is a project within the Texas Department of Transportation. They are studying expansion of the I-35 corridor through the Dallas-Fort Worth area and the I-69 corridor through the Houston area. The preferred I-35 corridor alone is 521 miles long and includes 5,307 square miles. The Texas corridor is truly a super corridor that could be up to 1,200 feet wide. That's 4 football fields end to end, 6 lanes of auto traffic, 4 lanes of truck traffic, rail lines for freight, rail lines for people, and a utility corridor for oil and gas pipelines, electricity transmission, and telecommunications. Work on the super corridor has been underway since February 2004. The first public meetings were held between April and June in 2004. More public meetings were held in 2005. The draft environmental impact statement was completed in April of 2006. 56 public meetings were held in July and August in 2006, and in all, 173 meetings have been held, and more than 4,000 public comments have been collected. The final environmental impact statement is scheduled for completion in the fall of 2006, and the final federal approval is expected in the summer of 2007. At a public meeting in San Antonio, 1,200 people showed up. 300 had to be turned away. In Temple, 1,600 people showed up. Here's how a meeting at Waco was reported by local television.
Good night, John Gilbert. TxDOT officials say a Trans-Texas Corridor hearing in Waco tonight was the largest and most vocal hearing they've seen so far.
For 3 weeks now, the state has been holding public forums on what you think about the plan to build a superhighway on a patch of land just east of I-35. Kevin Steele has tonight's top story.
Hundreds of them, chest puffed with pride and very often adorned with stickers of contempt for TTC, the proposed Trans-Texas Corridor.
It's something we're going to fight, and I'm going to fight it hard. I'm not going to roll over on this one.
Robin and Bill Levy's contempt, they believe they could lose their land just east of 35. Up to 1 million Texans could be affected, leaving a lot of people with questions. For example, you'd assume the state would want to bypass areas like this, Waco Memorial Gardens, a cemetery on 20 square acres just east of I-35. That's what has so many people concerned. We just don't know. It's why at least 900 people showed up. Several were neutral or behind the plan.
I think that it's maybe not the best thing going, but it seems to be the only answer we have with all this terrible amount of traffic.
But dozens were vigorously opposed. And TxDOT had to bring in more than 100 chairs to handle the overflow crowd.
I disagree that it can't hurt anything. I think it can hurt a lot of things. It comes through our prime blackland farming community.
TxDOT says people will buy into the plan when they understand it.
One of the things you hear quite often is that this is already a done deal. And that's quite far from the truth. This is not a done deal.
But on this night, zealots on both sides were easier to find than converts.
I think it's being crammed down the throats of the constituents of Texas.
It's just the whole thought of eminent domain that's untasteful to most people. The fact that someone can come in and take what you own.
In Waco, Kevin Steele, NBC6 News.
In the professional community, the super corridor concept has been well received by both government and business. The North American Super Corridor Coalition has received a $2.5 million grant from the federal government and has members in Canada, Mexico, and the United States who have paid from $2,500 to $50,000 for the privilege. Among those members are the Kansas City Southern Lines and the Kansas City Smartport. In 2005, Kansas City Southern acquired a Mexican railroad company and the Panama Canal Railroad. Now they control the rail lines from Mexico's southernmost ports of Lázaro Cárdenas and Veracruz to Kansas City. Kansas City is working to become the nation's super inland port through a non-profit economic development organization called Kansas City Smartport, which was formed in 2001. By resolution, the Kansas City City Council is allowing the construction of a Mexican customs facility on land that the city owns. The facility will be named Kansas City Customs Port. Preparations are being made for container freight offloaded in Mexico's ports to move by rail and truck directly to Kansas City Superport. New technology is expected to reduce the U.S.-Mexico border to nothing more than an electronic speed bump. Along with this new supercorridor concept comes a new concept in financing: public-private partnerships. In December of 2004, the Texas Department of Transportation partnered with Centra-Zachary, who will invest $6 billion in the construction of the first segment of the supercorridor, and then give it to TxDOT, along with another $1.2 billion for the right to build and operate the Trans-Texas Corridor for the next 50 years. Centra is a Spanish company that partnered with the Australian Macquarie Infrastructure Group to acquire a 99-year lease to operate the Chicago Skyway. This public-private partnership paid the city of Chicago $1.83 billion for the privilege. They also acquired the 157-mile Indiana Tollway for 75 years and paid Indiana $3.85 billion. This new method of financing infrastructure has generated a lot of excitement among public officials. Greg Carey, managing director of Goldman Sachs & Company, told the Texas Transportation Forum that virtually all infrastructure assets should be available for financing or refinancing using this method of public-private partnership arrangement. Why are private investors willing to spend such staggering sums? Tolls and fees provide a long-term, reliable income stream they just cannot resist. Let's look at what's in store for the Indiana toll road users. Commercial fees will nearly double during the first 4 years, while auto tolls remain flat. Then, in 2010, auto tolls will catch up with the commercial rates, and both will increase each year thereafter. Carey says that all but 14 states have already changed their laws or are currently considering legislation to allow this public-private partnership method of financing with foreign investors. Foreign investment also dominates the ports that will be handling the freight loaded onto Kansas City Southern lines in Veracruz and Lazaro Cardenas. These ports are owned or operated by the Chinese holding company Hutchinson Whampoa Limited. This mega corporation is capitalized at more than $700 billion, has operations in 54 countries, and more than 200,000 employees worldwide. They own 43 port facilities in 21 countries, which includes the ports at both ends of the Panama Canal. Another ominous building block toward the North American Union is the North American Cooperative Security Act, introduced in the Senate by Indiana's Richard Lugar, and in the House by Florida's Katherine Harris. This bill does not create the North American Union, but it does provide a legislative underpinning for the activities that are now underway by several committees and working groups. If enacted, the State Department will be required to provide semi-annual reports to Congress on the progress toward implementation of virtually all the goals set forth by the Security and Prosperity Partnership. These goals are the elements Robert Pastor said were necessary to create the North American Union. They include a common external tariff, a common security perimeter, an electronic speed bump called Sentry, and a biometric-based national database. In an effort to counter some of the adverse publicity, the official White House Security and Prosperity Partnership webpage posted a myth-fact page which claims the SPP in no way, shape, or form considers the creation of a European Union-like structure. The events and facts on the ground, however, strongly suggest that just the opposite is true. NAFTA provides the legal foundation. CAFTA expands the foundation to Central America. The supercorridor opens the floodgate, and the Security and Prosperity Partnership provides guidance to Congress. Regardless of the denials and claims to the contrary, the major elements for a North American Union are in place and progressing rapidly. This may be progress toward a much larger picture. When NAFTA went into force in 1994, the Free Trade Area of the Americas was launched with a summit in Miami. These negotiations have continued over the years in an effort to expand the Union concept to the entire continent. This fits nicely into the United Nations Organization Chart, which divides the world into 5 administrative regions. Of course, any relationship to the United Nations will also be denied, and it may be purely coincidental. There can be no question that NAFTA, CAFTA, the Trans-Texas Corridor, and related activities are changing America dramatically. Proponents contend that these changes will strengthen the nation. Others contend that our national sovereignty is being erased. The transfer of policy-making power to appointed officials, committees and working groups, advisory boards, and trilateral parliamentary councils is not the form of government described in the U.S. Constitution. The only power on earth strong enough to redirect this rush toward Robert Pastor's vision of a North American community is the power of the people who choose to exercise it at the ballot box.